For years, brain-damaging toxins have lurked in various jars and pouches of baby foods we trust to give to our little ones.
And this is the future of our country.
With untold damage to America's children. Tonight, broken trust.
It's sickening, and it could all have been prevented.
In an agency designed to protect us.
There is this failure on behalf of the FDA.
Because the FDA does not have our backs.
How did we get here?
For years, we've uncovered hidden poisons in baby food.
There is no requirement that these companies test for toxic elements like arsenic and lead.
I was not aware of that.
And who's failed to get it in check.
DC is broken.
This is unacceptable. Completely unacceptable.
Thanks for joining us for this investigative half hour, taking an in-depth look at how those in charge of food safety are failing America's kids. I'm Lisa Fletcher. Food choices are some of the most important decisions parents make for their babies early in life. Their developing brains and bodies far more susceptible to toxins and their lifelong effects than ours. Parents expect, and babies deserve, food that is free of poisonous ingredients like lead and arsenic. Doesn't seem like a lot to ask in the United States of America, but apparently it is. For years, we've investigated the consistent failures of the FDA and industry to ensure safe food for infants and toddlers, failures that have yet to be remedied. Now, we've put it all in one place, the documented failures of the agency charged with protecting your health. From the unanswered demands by U.S. attorneys general to the repeated calls from Congress for the FDA to act, to the suffering of real families harmed by toxins in their baby's food.
Rudy is the best boy. He is the sweetest little boy. He loves to play. He loves blocks and building.
Rudy Callahan is a happy, active toddler, says his mom, Sarah. So, when the phone rang after a routine health screening, the news stopped the family in their tracks.
The Maryland Health Department called and said, "Hey, your son has lead poisoning." And we were shocked.
And confused. Home surveys and searches for sources of lead turned up nothing. Even an x-ray of Rudy's stomach left them without answers.
A work colleague told me that there was a recall, that the FDA had issued a recall for the Wanabana apple cinnamon fruit puree pouches. And my mouth dropped to the floor.
These pouches are now the subject of a massive recall and international investigation. The cinnamon, used to flavor the puree, was loaded with lead, 2,000 times above recommended safety standards. More than 500 people across 44 states have been poisoned, mostly toddlers, revealing not just the scope of this mass poisoning, but a problem we've been documenting for years. Heavy metals, lead, arsenic, cadmium, and mercury lurking in baby food, completely unregulated.
Wanabana is an horrendous case study in something we've been investigating for years, and there are still no enforceable standards. There are no limits set for these toxic ingredients by the FDA. What's your reaction to that?
It just seems like they don't care enough about this vulnerable population of people.
It's settled science that there is no level of lead known to be without harmful effects, especially for children. It's a neurotoxin that can have irreversible consequences on a child's brain development, lowering IQ, causing behavioral and developmental disorders, and central nervous system damage that, according to the CDC, can even cause death. Dr. Philip Landrigan is one of the world's leading voices against toxic metals in baby food.
It's not acceptable in a society such as ours to allow children to be exposed to these levels of lead in baby food.
But to this day, lead in baby food is not regulated. There's no requirement that baby food makers test their products to ensure safety. And it is at least 7 years after the issue first appeared on the radar of the feds. This is Dr. Sean Callan, toxicologist and neuroscientist, now the CEO of a lips analytics lab in Denver. In 2017, his team partnered with the nonprofit Clean Label Project's Jackie Bowen and performed the first comprehensive tests of hundreds of baby food brands for heavy metals. What they found was alarming enough to bring it to the FDA. and the agency called for a high-profile meeting that fall.
That call ended up being less about what can you do and more about is what we, a Lips and Clean Label project, what we were telling them trustworthy or believable. And that, that obviously can be disappointing because you're hoping to move past that and get to the conversation around the solution. And that is not what happened.
After we had that initial call, I sent several follow-up emails of, hey, we can help you do this. What if we do this? All to which we didn't receive a response.
Callan and Bowen told us the agency went dark, ignoring calls to set limits for toxic metals in baby food, until 4 years later, when, in 2021, the work of this pair would bring the problem to a fever pitch. That February, armed with their data, a bombshell congressional investigation brought light to a problem that had lived in the shadows. It reads, baby food manufacturers hold a special position of public trust. Consumers believe that they would not sell unsafe products. Consumers also believe that the federal government would not knowingly permit the sale of unsafe baby food. As this staff report reveals, baby food manufacturers and federal regulators have broken the faith.
What responsibility did the FDA have to act on this information when they had it at least 5 years ago?
It first of all reflects a failure of government to do its job. FDA needs to establish standards quickly. In my opinion, as a pediatrician, the federal agencies need to act now.
The report revealed products as much as 177 times over the limit of contaminant levels set for bottled water. Among the worst culprits for arsenic, rice, common in cereal for babies. The Congressional Investigative Committee concluded that the FDA should require manufacturers to test their products, and the FDA should set limits for heavy metals in baby food. But they didn't. That same year, partisan politics prevailed, and the Baby Food Safety Act, which would have set limits on toxic metals in baby food, failed on the Hill. And 23 state attorneys general banded together to demand the FDA take action within months, not years. Yet the FDA did not set limits and rejected the petition. In 2022, we discovered the foods identified in the congressional investigation as dangerous appeared over and over again on states' approved lists of food available to low-income families through a federally subsidized program known as WIC, short for Women, Infants, and Children. WIC helps to feed nearly half of all infants born in the U.S. by offering families benefits to buy specific foods designated on a WIC shopping list. Devastating, said mom and pediatrician Dr. Anna Marie Temple.
You are passionate and angry about contaminants being in baby food. How much worse does it get for you when you find out it's in the WIC program?
It's devastating because the illnesses that are going around is affecting disproportionately the families that are economically disadvantaged. And they also happen to get the foods with the heaviest loads of heavy metals. It is unfair, it is unjust.
Across the country, in California, lawmakers got sick of waiting for the feds and the FDA to protect kids. They passed AB 899 that forces manufacturers to test their products being sold in California once a month. The law's architect, Al Murasucci.
California often leads the country in terms of fighting for consumer protections.
It's a done deal in the Golden State, taking effect in January of 2024. We have repeatedly asked for those test results and received nothing, calling into question whether manufacturers are actually adhering to the law in California. Back in Maryland, the Callahans are powerless, waiting to see if lead poisoning impacts Rudy's future.
Unfortunately for us, we live our day-to-day life loving him and being happy with him, but I think inside we're always waiting for the next shoe to drop.
Hundreds of other families are in the same position, and they want to know why. Why the FDA, despite promising action to limit heavy metals, has failed to do it. Coming up, our exclusive investigation uncovers erased deadlines and ignored opportunities to get this under control.
This is unacceptable. Completely unacceptable.
As one lawmaker is losing patience. Our exclusive interview, next.
We know about lead in paint and gasoline and the long-standing efforts to clean it up. But how does a harmful toxin like lead enter the foods consumed by babies? It's in the environment. It can get into the crops through soil, water, air, and processing, or even be added intentionally to falsify amounts of expensive ingredients. The FDA's theory about how cinnamon and applesauce became so severely tainted. Lowering levels of lead in baby food requires careful sourcing and testing to find crops that are grown in the least contaminated conditions. It would require baby food makers to closely monitor their supply chain, test their final products, and potentially pivot to cleaner sources. Spotlight on America has pressed the FDA about heavy metals in baby food since 2021, asking critical questions in roughly 50 emails, broadcasting more than a dozen investigations over 3 years, and submitting multiple requests for interviews, all of which have been declined. Responses are often similar, like the FDA takes the issue of toxic elements in baby food very seriously, or the FDA continues to make steady progress on the issue of lead in baby food. When hundreds of kids were potentially poisoned from lead in Wanabata cinnamon applesauce, we compared the FDA data to our own. We contacted every state health department in the U.S. and discovered more kids and states were impacted than the FDA was reporting. After broadcasting that story, the FDA posted a statement that the agency and the CDC were both collecting data and not necessarily comparing notes, making an accurate case count impossible to confirm. Our follow-up inquiry was met with a familiar refrain from the FDA stating, "Our goal continues to be ensuring access to safe foods."
Our goal was to sit down with someone at the FDA to talk about the questions we've been raising for years. We asked for an interview for this special, and after 5 weeks of consideration, the agency declined to talk with us. We're not the only ones having a hard time getting answers from decision makers at the FDA. The leading voice on the Hill, who launched the congressional investigation into baby food makers and the FDA in 2021, publicly confronted the FDA's commissioner for the first time in a heated hearing this spring, frustrated that 3 years have gone by, little's been done, and kids across America are still consuming foods loaded with toxic heavy metals. While baby food is no longer on Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy's shopping list, it is still high on his list of concerns. 3 years have passed since his investigation, and kids across America are still consuming foods loaded with toxic heavy metals.
How did we get here?
I thought that back in 2021, when we first released the report and there was tremendous attention, we were going to see a lot more action. We prompted the first ever kind of FDA action on this particular issue. It's called Closer to Zero.
Closer to Zero was supposed to limit heavy metals in baby foods by setting guidelines for industry and informing consumers about ingredients.
They didn't follow through.
Here we are in 2024, and the FDA's Closer to Zero timelines have been repeatedly moved back, with not one final limit having been set. We even discovered the agency quietly removed timelines from its website, making it impossible to hold them accountable. But look at this. We archived screenshots of the FDA site back in 2021. And you can clearly see what the agency promised: limits for lead and arsenic by April of 2024. Those dates were erased from the website and eventually replaced with this: no update.
This is unacceptable. Completely unacceptable.
In a recent hearing with FDA Commissioner Robert Califf, Krishnamurthy confronted him with the agency's Closer to Zero website.
I want to throw up here a screenshot of your website from today. So in terms of when, for instance, arsenic in baby food would be examined, no update. That's what it says, right?
I'll take your word for it. I can't see it from this distance.
Quite frankly, sir, I respectfully say that your Closer to Zero program at this point is closer to zero updates. And that's very, very disturbing.
Califf did not respond further to Closer to Zero. In the weeks following the hearing, the FDA changed its website again, now targeting the end of 2025 for final guidelines.
How is America supposed to trust the agency that is supposed to protect the health of individuals, including these babies that are so vulnerable, when we can't even trust the deadlines that they set but keep moving back?
I don't know, and I think this is why people are angry. The whole Closer to Zero program looks like a zero to me at this point, and I'm very concerned.
Do you have an answer for why the FDA hasn't followed through on this?
I don't, and I don't know if it's a question of lack of resources. I don't know if it's industry resistance. I don't know if it's a lack of willpower or it's all of the above.
How concerned are you that the FDA is too influenced by industry?
I'm very concerned.
In response to questions about the FDA's lack of oversight on the baby food industry and absence of any standards for heavy metals, Commissioner Califf bounced the ball back to legislators, asking for the authority to require the baby food industry to test its products.
I think the best way to think about FDA in general is that we're referees. You all in Congress actually write the rule book. But what we can do, for example, in food for children, is to have the manufacturers be required to do the testing, which is the way the drug system works. The manufacturers of drugs have to test every batch.
You would like us to give you that regulatory authority?
Yes.
Turns out the agency already has the authority to do far more than it has when it comes to cracking down on manufacturers. Earlier this year, the nation's top law enforcement officials told the FDA to use the power it already has to make baby food safer. In this 44-page letter to the FDA, nearly 24 attorneys general explained to the FDA in great detail that finished product testing for lead and heavy metals can be considered a preventive control under the current regulatory structure, meaning the FDA can do it now. The law says the FDA can require manufacturers to test products for hazards. Then there's this provision in the Code of Federal Regulations that states the FDA may require food testing to address an identified or suspected food safety problem as FDA deems appropriate. So, for example, in 2021, when a congressional committee identified numerous baby foods tainted with dangerous levels of heavy metals, the FDA could have considered that a food safety problem and required the identified companies to test. We asked the agency if it considers heavy metals in baby food to be a food safety problem. They told us yes. But to this day, they have not required testing or set final limits for heavy metals. Meantime, Congress itself has not taken action to set limits or mandate testing. So states are stepping in. Remember Rudy Callahan, the little boy poisoned by lead in his applesauce?
House Bill 97, Senate Bill 723, Rudy's Law.
He is enshrined forever in a Maryland state law. Rudy's Law, signed just this May, will require manufacturers to test their products and eventually make the results available to the public with a QR code right on the jar. The law's architect, Jason Nunez, said it started with our investigations.
I was watching the news, I saw your story, and right away I knew that we needed to act.
I mean, the truth of this is that Congress has had every opportunity in the world for years to get this done, and it's become a partisan issue.
Yes,
the FDA has had every opportunity in the world to get this done for years. Should U.S. legislators and the FDA be taking a cue from you, given that you got this done in 90 days?
They have to step it up. They have to step it up. Children are being hurt. They eat this food every single day.
You met the Callahans, you met Rudy. How much did putting a little face and a little tiny body on the information change or motivate even more what you were doing?
Oh yeah, I lit a fire for sure.
Several other states are now considering similar legislation to make baby food safer. And as manufacturers navigate the new laws that will change the landscape of their business, there's a massive effort to hold them accountable in court. Inside, a scathing legal battle. Next. The government has failed to hold baby food companies accountable for toxins in their food, but the nation's courts could be on the verge of doing it themselves. Leading attorneys are getting their hands on documents and correspondence they say proves a willingness among manufacturers and the FDA to ignore the issue. No attorney has explored the problem deeper than the one you're about to meet. He represents more than 3,000 families. Thousands Thousands of kids are suffering from ADHD and autism that their parents say can be traced back to the food they ate at the most sensitive time in their lives.
And once parents learn of this, it's obviously a tremendous shock. It was this hidden threat in the food that parents simply had no idea about.
Pedram Esfandiari, partner at the Wisner-Baum law firm, launched the groundbreaking legal battle against several major baby food makers, alleging they knowingly sold food with astronomical amounts of toxic metals, saying their malicious recklessness and callous disregard for human life has wreaked havoc on the health of countless vulnerable children, all so that the defendants could maximize profits while deliberately misleading parents regarding the safety of their baby foods. As you built your case, you tracked down leading doctors and scientists to determine the true impact of heavy metals on kids. What did you learn?
If there is an exposure to a toxin like lead or arsenic, which let's not forget, that's rat poison, what we're talking about when we're talking about arsenic, and lead is a historically well-known neurotoxin, the doses of exposure that have been associated with causing brain injuries in children are extremely low.
But, says Esfandiari, a failure by the government to regulate the manufacturers and a failure by the manufacturers to regulate themselves has put families in a position of neither trusting the FDA nor baby food makers.
And that is a pretty important story that we want to tell the jury. And we're going to say, listen, there is a reason for this. There is a reason why this specific child ate contaminated foods and suffered brain injury. It's because of the lack of laws and regulations. There is this failure by the FDA in properly regulating these baby foods. And as American history has taught us over and over and over again, from cigarettes to pesticides to car manufacturers and now unfortunately baby foods, it's never a good idea for industry to regulate itself.
Our reporting from years ago uncovered and validated the fact that the FDA has known about these issues for, at a minimum, 7 years. Yet they did not act. Why do you think they haven't acted, and what has been the cost of their inaction?
I think there is numerous reasons why the FDA has been slow to act or not acting at all. And in fact, we've seen documents from the FDA itself stating that one of the main issues it's had in regulating baby foods has been the lack of resources. They simply haven't had enough money, which is kind of bonkers when you think about it.
Has the discovery process unearthed any information about the FDA's inaction on the issue? I'm
limited in what I can talk about because a lot of the information is under seal. What I can say though is the discovery we have gotten to date indicates that historically there has been a pretty cozy relationship between the FDA, specifically the food division within the FDA, and certain baby food manufacturers. And the FDA, unfortunately, has been prioritizing industry's bottom line over the food safety and making sure that the foods are uncontaminated with heavy metals.
Esfandiari says despite demand from parents to politicians, he's seeing nothing resembling a rapid response to what's been called a crisis in the baby food industry.
And unfortunately, the FDA and government agencies are still lagging on this front. But the silver lining is that with greater availability of information, more people are learning about this issue.
People like Leah Segedy, mom turned activist, who's raising the volume on this conversation with hundreds of thousands of parents who follow her online. You have so many followers on social, Leah, and they refer to you as the real FDA. What does that tell you?
It tells me that I'm doing the testing that the FDA should be doing.
She independently tests products, looking for dangerous hidden ingredients that will never appear on the label. What do you expect from the FDA and lawmakers on this issue?
I expect the FDA to implement proposed limits for lead and cadmium, mercury, and arsenic for babies to keep them safe. We should not have to be chemists, and we should not have to be sending this baby food off to the lab, but that's kind of what needs to happen right now because the FDA does not have our back.
She says until baby food makers are required to test their products and inform consumers, she's going to keep testing products and letting Americans know what she finds.
As a mother, I'm very concerned with what babies are eating across the United States, and I really feel like the FDA needs to grow a pair of cast iron ovaries and implement changes so that we can all protect our children. This is their job, not ours.
Our investigations don't end here. We'll keep asking questions on the Hill and of the agency charged with keeping our food supply safe until you have the information and answers you deserve. Thanks for watching. I'm Lisa Fletcher.
To contact your member of Congress and urge action on this issue, to learn more about how parents can ensure food safety for their children, and to watch our years-long catalog of investigations on this topic, go to spotlightinvestigates.com. There you'll also find a link to the special that you can watch and share.